All right. Looks like we're good. Yep. All right, we're good. So why don't we take off? First question, that's the one you did, right?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Okay. Let's see here. I want to read it off. Do you have it up right now?
It was just pull it up real quick. So provided justification for using or not using a 3-minute rest period between sets during a resistance training exercise, anaerobic training program, or practice of a skill. And what I said was it depends on the training goal. Like everything else in strength and conditioning, it depends. So I broke it down pretty easy. I had it into endurance training and just strength and power training. So aerobic training and anaerobic training. For the endurance aerobic stuff, you're usually going to take between 30 and 60-second break between it. Because endurance training relies heavily upon your oxidative metabolism and it increases your mitochondrial density. Aerobic metabolism is better the more mitochondria you have. So the more you have, the greater endurance you're going to have. So you want to take less break so you can increase your mitochondria so you can have better aerobic metabolism to the endurance training aspect. So that would be the way you would do less than a 3-minute break. Whereas for strength power, it's going to rely heavily on anaerobic metabolism, and you must allow for adequate recovery of high energy substrates. And for the most part, when it comes to, we'll use strength training as an example for one set of stuff, we'll do like one set of 5 or whatever. That's not, I assume it's not going to last somebody more than 30 seconds to do a set of 5 on, back squat at like 75, 80% of your max. Unless you're doing like isometrics, or not isometrics, but eccentric, something like that, but for basic, fundamental 1x5 is 75%. That's going to be mainly solely your ATP PCR system. And the duration of that system uses a 3 to 15 second not rest period, but how long it takes to do it. It's going to be between 3 to 15 seconds. So anaerobic is high intensity, slow recovery because you need to replenish those ATP stores before you get into your next bout of exercise. And you're getting, as heavy as we'll say maybe like 85%, 90%, 95%, it's going to take more time to recover those ATP stores if you're going at such a high intensity. So for strength training, it's going to be high intensity, slow recovery, whereas for endurance, it's going to be low intensity, high recovery. So you don't have to take as long as a break between endurance as you would for strength and power. So strength and power, you want to take 3+ minutes, 2 to 5, but most people are going to be right at that middle ground of 3 minutes. That's an aspect of you want to take that 3-minute break, whereas when it comes to endurance, you want to take less than 3-minute breaks. You can hit certain adaptations metabolically and hormonally, which we talked about last week. So that's what I have for that.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing too. I always go back and forth with this because like the research shows, right? Like that the longer rest periods when you're doing something, that's, like an axial load or something that's seriously taxing, like an Olympic lift or something like that. Heavy squats, heavy benches. And then, you like you said, with your endurance, you're taking a low rest periods because you're using, way less load compared to your one RM. What is there to be said for like doing things under duress? Because in competition, I was just listening to a talk about this the other day. In competition, you're under duress a lot of the time, and you're performing movements under fatigue. Granted, you're not using such like a heavy load, like you got something on your back. But is there something to be said for utilizing different rest protocols for different system? So for example, switching this on its head and having like you're using 85 to 90% with a low rest period, and then vice versa with the endurance. So I'm like curious your thoughts on that.
I can agree with that. I think it also depends on the sport. So if we take baseball, for example, up to bat, you're going to be waiting innings between your next bat. Whereas if it's something like football, even though football plays last 7 seconds, after that 7 seconds and you're right back onto the line, there's probably maybe like a 30-second window where you have to, again, utilize a ton of ATP because you're going, high intensity. It's a 7-second play for the most part. So for that 7 seconds, you're using ATP PCR, but recovery between plays is going to be like 30 seconds, maybe 45 seconds max. You got to play clock. You can't, all right, we're going to, wait 3.5, 4 minutes between plays so everybody can recover their ATP PCR system, a lot better. And I was actually watching something a couple weeks ago that Joe Ken was talking about. It was his presentation at the coaches conference in 2012 and how he does his micro, mesos, and macro cycles. And he does a very it's similar to kind of like your traditional, like, all right, week 1, week 2, week 3, deload. Week 1, week 2, week 3, deload. Each cycle. What he does is he'll do week 1, stay low, introductory stuff, new stuff, figure out how to do things, like teach. Like it's like your teaching week, your introduction, new exercises, your cycle. Week 2, all right, we're gonna load it up. Week 3 is your deload, and then he says week 4 is performance week. He's like, so and then after that, you start your new cycle, and your new cycle is, new percentages based on what you did for your performance week, for your new cycle, for your base week. But he's like, the reason we do that is because when you have a linear path and then a deload and then a linear path and then a deload, it's traditional. It's what everybody does, blah, blah, blah. He's like, but here, you come down, you go performance, and instead of having that performance week on week 3 and your deload week 4, since they're switched, your next week after you go heavy and go crazy with a 1 rep max and you still need recovery, you're getting right back in weight training. He's like, I believe in strength power, like proper recovery between stuff. He's like, but you also have to understand that there is such thing as strength endurance and power endurance. Stuff you have to be durable to do these things, but still be able to exert enough power or endurance, whatever it may be, when you're under duress and you're under fatigue, because that's what athletics is. He's like, it's being able to maintain the strength and power for a long period of time. He's like, like I said, you're not going to be waiting 3 minutes between plays in a football play. It's going to be 7 seconds, 30-second break, get back into it. But yeah, I definitely agree with that. That there is a time and place. I do believe that you need to understand how to do strength endurance, power endurance, along with mobile endurance stuff to better yourself as an athlete through weight training.
Bring up a good point too with the sport specificity too. So yeah, it really depends. If you got like a repeat ability sport where you're gonna be fatigued, you're not gonna be able to recover every time. Where you're like, baseball's probably one of the most like lazy man sports. You know what I mean? Where you have the ability to recover. You're never really like, unless you're getting, you're running hard, stealing or running hard for like a double, triple, inside the park home run.
I don't know.
Nothing.
Dr. K might have something to say about that.
Yeah. Yeah, he might. We'll see what he says after these comments. But it's fun. I'm not bashing baseball because it's one of my favorite sports. It's just in terms of the necessary ability to be able to kind of rev up the engine, it's not as big as other sports. So I think that's too. Go ahead.
Think about something like volleyball too. I mean, like it's similar to football where you got plays are going to last a little bit longer sometimes. You go have these volleys where it just keeps going back over the net, but each time you hit the ball, you're putting power behind it. When people are jumping up and they're spiking the ball as hard as they can, and somebody hits it back off and it goes right back over, and crap, I got to do it again, and it just keeps doing it and doing it and doing it. And usually the team that loses is the one that can't maintain that power over that long period of time. And the one who wins is the one who can keep hitting those spikes repetitively, even if they're getting tired, they can still do it and still exert a lot of force into it. So I think there is definitely a means to training strength and power in an endurance aspect.
Absolutely. And now that you say that,
maybe not all the time, but like there are certain times you're going to be like, all right, we're going to, basically we're going to kick your ass today in a way where we're going to kick your ass in the sport field. We're going to make you do all this stuff at high intensity, but you're going to have no recovery.
Right. And it's good to, because inherently, if you say that and like, say you put out like an Instagram post or something and you said that, you would get bashed because it's like, oh, this isn't particular to the sport. This doesn't have this carryover, this and that. But there is something that has to be said for putting people under duress and fatigue-like conditions so that it can translate out into their sport. So maybe not necessarily, it's not hitting or targeting the energy system that you quote unquote want to get adaptation out of, but it's just something like, hey, we're gonna drill you hard today, and we're just gonna see how you react, type of thing.
Right.
You bring up a great point too. Now that I'm thinking about the baseball swing, it's kind of like the spike. Say you got like somebody, there's some heavy hitters out there who swing for the fences every time. I'm thinking like, I don't know what you know about baseball. I know you didn't know much that, but there's a few players. It's just like Adrian Beltre comes to mind. Carlos Gomez is just he swings for the fences every time. So you'll see him swing and miss on a pitch, and his knee will hit the ground because he swung so hard. So Adrian Beltre is another example. He would hit the ball so hard, he'd pull through, drop a nuke into left field and he'd finish on his knee, which is not standard approach to a baseball swing. But that being said, a swing and a miss, you're using a lot of power output from your body. And then
Yeah.
you have about 30 seconds to recover until the next pitch, maybe 30 seconds maximum. So that is something to be said. There's a lot of power using that summation of forces, everything in your body. So I
Right.
did take that a little bit for granted.
That could also be mental aspect too, because if you're out there and you're ready to like, all right, you get on the plate, and you're kind of like, I'm gonna, bomb this, and you miss, you're kind of like, crap. You got to try to do that again.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a mental thing then too. Like, so even the psychological aspect of having that thrown into it, when you're kind of like, holy crap! Like, again, bringing up volleyball, you hit a spike, and you're kind of like, that's definitely gonna hit the ground, and somebody hits it up, and you're kind of like, what? I don't, because like. I don't understand. Like you put so much force into it. You like
Right.
sometimes like again, I never played volleyball. Like I played pickup, like it was it club volleyball, rec volleyball. When I was at Salisbury, just because me and some of the research group were kind of like we're gonna go out, we're gonna have fun, whatever. And like I would hit the ball and I would like put some force behind it, so I would hit it. And kind of like, how do you do that? Like doesn't that like because you're like that would hurt your arm, that stings. So you put so much force into it, you're kind of like no one's gonna hit this, and they do it, you gotta do it again. So
it's like I put all I had into that one. What am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go from here? But that's right. It's like that's where you teach. That's where we coach that repeat ability, so that you can build that capacity to be able to. Okay, I put all I had into that one. Guess what? Another one coming my way. Got to do it again, type of thing.
Right. Yep.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
All right, let's get it going. Second question. So we're talking now. Different metabolic adaptations that occur with endurance versus anaerobic conditioning programs. So we kind of touched on that, obviously, just in our last talk, but let's go through it a little bit again. In that anaerobic spectrum, ATP, phosphocreatine, you have about that 30-second window, right? And so for no oxygen, trying to increase power capacity with that. And then I thought it was interesting to note through the chapter how ATP concentrations don't differ between fiber types, and you're really never going to have like a below a 70% drop in ATP resting concentrations. However, it's where that phosphocreatine, that's the one that drops, and it's different. Type 2 fibers have a much higher amount in the capacity for phosphocreatine, and then that's the one that replenishes so much throughout the anaerobic workout. So basically took that and then into, when you have more of endurance training, endurance training is what's going to give you like that oxidative capacity, right? Isn't it? So capillary density, so you can help, exchange gases, heat, waste, and nutrients within the muscle. So that's the best for circulation, which has serious value in really any program, because as kind of a supplement to resistance training, it's necessary to have that aerobic component so that you can help recycle those nutrients that you're building up from resistance exercise. So I always recommend that. I mean, obviously any good program would have that. So again, to increasing mitochondrial function and capacity. And then what else are written here? Those are the key ones. And then it's funny, the research as it's kind of displayed in the book about like the adaptations that happen with anaerobic training, a lot of it is kind of speculative. Like there's no like sure amount. They talk about myoglobin, but none of it's like some research shows some improvements, some that necessarily doesn't. But I think the overall summary you can get from that is that the buffering capacity will probably have some potentially increased by doing that anaerobic training. So increased buffering capacity really, and then so research was saying too, potential increase in resting concentrations of creatine kinase and myokinase. So I wrote a little note here and said that research was unclear. So that's what we have to take into account. I think at the end of the day, it's important to understand that these don't really operate in separate of each other. They have to be part of a well-rounded program. You have to have both to really receive the adaptations. You know what I mean? So I specifically noted a note I wanted to talk about with you. Page 49 in the book. Let me get it out here. They brought up a study about resistance exercise enhancing molecular signaling of the mitochondrial biogenesis. So I guess in layman's terms, basically saying that by performing anaerobic training, I believe, and then immediately following having a resistance training session, had kind of helped enhance the effects of mitochondrial synthesis, if I read that right. Yeah, so they were doing about a 60-minute session, 65% of their VO2 max, right? And then immediately went to a 25-minute leg press session, and then they were showing some decent results in enhanced expression of genes that may help with mitochondrial synthesis. So I think basically it's just saying that it has a capacity, performing anaerobic style workouts may have the ability to influence your oxidative capacity as well, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah. So the study I did was kind of similar to what the book does. Like it's kind of along the same spectrum, but it's twisted opposite of it. But yeah, I could definitely agree that there needs to be something, I won't say set in stone when you come to making programs, but you got to have a fundamental understanding of how the body is going to adapt to certain stimulus you do, because that at the end of the day, like that's what's going to help your client future goals is they can maximize whatever system they're using. So again, we'll say baseball players, we're trying to maximize their ATP PCR systems. So having an understanding of how that works, things that are going to be adapted because of it compared to what it's going to be if you do oxidative training, understanding how each system kind of works on its own to increase stuff, but also understanding like, okay, we can still have baseball guys do oxidative type of training because we want to get that lactate and that hydrogen build out away from it. So understanding how to do stuff without also compromising the main system that you use. So I don't, again, I'm not one of those guys who's kind of like, you're going to do this, you're going to train this system, you're not going to do anything else. Like you got to be able to do things for each sport because, when it comes to athletics, everything's used. At some point, you're going to use every single system within, that your body has, and being able to understand, like, okay, even though this is your prime system, we're still going to train this system every so often. That way, you can kind of be one, well-rounded, and two, we can get those, that lactate buildup out, or we can get your power and your strength up. When I was in high school, a lot of the cross-country runners didn't touch a weight in their life. And then the guy who's the weight training coach now was my track coach when I was there, and he has some cross country runners in there. And the more he had them do some resistance training stuff, a lot of their times are getting better. It's either their times are getting better or they weren't feeling as fatigued in the race. And the reason for that is because we'll take for example the last 1,000 meters, you're gonna kick. You got to kick to get to that finish line, and it's going to suck. But if you have that extra strength, that extra power behind it, you're going to be outrunning people who don't touch a weight, for example. So, like I said, being able to understand how to train each system everywhere for an athlete without compromising the one that they primarily use, I think is a huge thing that often gets overlooked.
It's kind of like a law of like competing demands here, right? So like what can you do to maximize like this adaptation while simultaneously having something on the back burner, but not it impeding that adaptation that you're primarily targeting? And that goes back to the, what would you call it? The deconditioning rates of certain adaptations, right? So cause I'd have to look back at it, but I saw I think it was in Caldice's Triphasic where he put,
He's a man.
Yes, dude. He is such a good coach. And he had like the window of time where that adaptation is going to start to dwindle. So over a long period of time, I think aerobically is the one that keeps on the most. I believe it's almost like a 30-day period between like a 25 and 30-day window of time you can keep your aerobic capacity. So if you're working on that aerobic capacity, but then you're trying to train these individual adaptations within that, you can have that kind of window under that 30 days and then small little increments, in particular, maybe 1 to 2 week little microcycles that kind of help develop those other adaptations while simultaneously having that aerobic capacity staying put.
Right. So yeah, definitely agree with that.
That's important. I don't have as much experience as like in team sports actually programming, but I think that would be one of my number one things, one of the main things to focus on to make sure that I'm, hitting the right adaptations at the right time so that we're peaking at the right time. We're adapting throughout the process.
Yeah, it's difficult to do that too because you also got to take into account what they're doing in practice. So a lot of times they're going to get that aerobic or that glycolytic training at practice because they're going to do like wind sprints or repetitive running or, you know, up downs football or something like that. So like you got to kind of like, okay, you know, like you have to be like, I want to train your anaerobic or your aerobic or your glycolytic system a little bit today, but what are you guys going to do in practice today? And that's where you got to kind of have that relationship with the sport coach so you know how to program stuff the right way without interfering with what they're doing and getting into that overtraining state, because that's like the last thing we want.
That's a great point. The talks I was listening to last week had brought that up too, about the communication. Some of the coaches were even going as far as saying that they don't really condition their guys. Like, depending on which point in the season, they might not condition their guys because practice is just, that's all they need. Right.
Yeah,
so
we usually don't. So for baseball, when they have fall ball, August to early October, maybe. So like any type of running, aerobic conditioning stuff we do, I'm kind of like, we're not doing any of that. We're going to do strictly weight training until you guys get done. And once they get done and they get into that approaching Thanksgiving break and into winter break and early in season, when we have the most of the time, they're not at sport practice. That's when I will program and stuff like, all right, at the end of the workout today, we're going to go down there. We're going to do, you know, we have an indoor track. So I'm like, we're going to go run 60-meter sprints. We're going to do 5 of them. Or we're going to do interval runs, or we're going to go do Indian runs or whatever it may be. So it all depends on the time of year too that you have those athletes. Is when you, for the most part, like if they're not in sport practice, that's when I usually will program some type of either aerobic or more anaerobic stuff with it, so I'm not interfering with what the coach is doing.
That's a really good point. Yeah, you want to err on the side of caution too, right? Like if you think that, if you know they're getting a stimulus in practice, even if it maybe isn't the most potent, right? You don't want to take away from their strength gains or their performance on the field, court, whatever, but by running them into the ground outside of practice. So definitely err on the side of caution with that one.
Light on real quick. I'm getting dark. Hang on a second.
Got the CSCS in the background.
Cool.
All right. Let's jump into you took a research study, right? Or did you take a blog? Okay, cool. I took a research study as well, but I found a blog that kind of like led me to a research study. So like I'll jump back and forth on that. Do you wanna talk about yours first?
Yeah, I'll go first on mine. So I got it from the Journal of Strength and Conditioning. It's called Acute Neuromuscular and Metabolic Responses to Concurrent Endurance and Resistance Training. So notes I have down for this: author's purpose of the study was to test the metabolic and neurological responses of either upper and lower body resistance training, followed by a cycloergometry session, and then were reassessed. And they used 9 resistance trained men who all performed either cycloergometry and then bench press, only bench press, cycloergometry then back squat, or only back squat. The cycloergometry was performed at 75% of the trained male's maximum heart rate for 45 minutes, and the resistance training was at 80% of the client's 1 rep max for 6 sets, 2 volitional fatigue with a 2-minute rest between sets. So that's a lot going on. So they concluded that more reps were performed in the squat at set 1 without doing the cycloergometer test, and there were no differences in the bench press. So when you do only back squat, you're going to perform more sets, whereas when you do back squat with the cycloergometer, your fatigue is going to increase more. So conclusion: cycloergometry impaired back squat because 1, your lower body is used for both, and you're doing 2 different systems kind of concurrently, not at the same time, but concurrently. And 2, from a combo of local metabolic effects. So if you're doing, like I said, you're doing strength training for your lower body, followed by resistance training, you're getting different metabolic responses for both in an hour window, pretty much, probably. So lower body endurance training should not be done prior to lower body resistance training if the goal is to train strength and power. However, what I came to the conclusion was, if you're trying to train that strength endurance that we talked about earlier, then maybe it's something that you would want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it also showed that it doesn't affect different body parts of your upper body resistance training. With lower body aerobic, there's not going to be any detrimental effect or any metabolic response to it in the same area. But if you're doing that squat with the cycloergometry, you're going to get metabolic effects for it that are going to impair one or the
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So like you said, it's localized. And
other.
so I mean, that's an interesting study. I think it kind of revealed what we basically know, but the application of it is how we can kind of program based on what it says, right? Like we know that you're going to be fatigued from a bout of endurance exercise or aerobic into that, but then how you try to change up that stimulus. So what was the percent? Did you have the percent load for the squat?
Yeah, so all of the resist training was 80% of your 1 rep max for 6 sets until fatigue.
Oh, okay.
So
And so
that's
just
a
you
lot.
fatigued
Yeah,
earlier. That is a lot.
that's a lot. Like
Yeah.
people look at it and they're like 80% is not that much, you know what I mean? And then you put 80% on your back, you're kind of like that's a lot.
That
Until
is.
fatigue for 6 sets, that's a lot.
Right. So
And
I'd be, I'd almost like, I like that too, because what if, in programming wise, what if you were to get some, maximum intent, you took the load down a little bit and maybe you focused on, velocity or some speed. It really depends like what part of the program you are, but you could do that cycle and then you go over and take like a 65% potentially and focus on some speed. Or
right,
vice versa, you could take could take a maximal load again, but then maybe decrease the reps so you're not going to fatigue, trying to get a stimulus
right.
out of that.
Or switch it and do endurance based for the resistance training and do power based for the cycloergometer. So, like a Wingate.
Like a resistance based bike.
Yeah, so pedal as fast as you can for 30 seconds, and then go right back into squats and see how it is. So see if there's different effects for that.
Yeah.
I just thought of that. That actually is pretty cool to see that.
That would be interesting. I like the application. The reason I like research, I don't think it's the end all be all, but I like that it kind of it asks us as the coaches, like, how do you interpret this? And then we can go into the weight room and explore. It's tough
Right.
when you're in like a really small setting and you have like only a half hour or an hour with your kids or whatever. But like on our own or something, like testing out models like that, it's really fascinating for sure. All right, let's go. All right, I'm going to show you what I talked about. So I brought up a similar one. Let me actually get my study up here as well. Get some notes on it. Okay, so I took it out of it's actually an older article, but still has applications from October 96 from we got medicine and science and sports and exercise. The effects of moderate intensity endurance and high intensity intermittent training on anaerobic capacity and VO2 max. So so we had 14 subjects, all male. Age range was around 23 plus or minus a few years. What else are we looking at? Yep. So they completed a test where there's two training experiments using a mechanically braked cycloergometer, which seems to be the going rate for these type of tests. 6 weeks, the first group did a moderate intensity endurance training, 70% of VO2 max for 60 minutes, 5 days a week. And they measured it based on the accumulated oxygen deficit. That's kind of how they got their measurements here. So the second group did a high intensity intermittent training, which was also 5 days a week, 60 minutes, but this one was more exhaustive. They did 7 to 8 sets, 20-second bout of exercise at 170% of the VO2 max, 10-second rest between each bout. Okay.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah. Big time. They seem to, they take some, granted, these males were previously trained, but they do some pretty intense stuff here. And so what they found was in the first study, the anaerobic capacity did increase. Sorry, the VO2 max did increase. The anaerobic capacity did not. But in the second study, the VO2 max increased by 7, while the anaerobic capacity increased by 28%. So what it was basically saying was that moderate intensity aerobic training improves maximal aerobic power, but didn't change anaerobic capacity. But the high intensity intermittent group, so they were using kind of like a modified Tabata method, if you will. Funny enough, the guy who did the study, his name was Izumi Tabata, a Japanese scientist. So that's pretty funny that way. But they found that the high intensity intermittent Tabata style training may improve both not anaerobic, but also aerobic energy supplying systems, because the anaerobic capacity went up 28%, but the VO2 max also went up by 7 milliliters per kilogram. And the first group only improved by about 5 milliliters using more of a, like a long, slow distance method, kind of like
Right.
more of an aerobic, an oxidative, less stress on the body. So basically, I think the reason I brought up this study was because it went kind of seemingly paired with this study from the book, where it was talking about how utilizing anaerobic training with high intensity bouts in a kind of like a 20-second on, 10-second off, repeated measures like that, not only will help increase the anaerobic energy and anaerobic adaptations, but it also has carryover to improving your aerobic capacity in VO2 max. So
Right.
basically calling for, the people that are married to these long, slow distance type of runs where you're running for longer periods of time, you may actually benefit from having more of an intermittent style training where you're taking less time, but it's going to be a little bit more intense.
Right. Yeah. When I was in college, we did fartlek runs for like 25 minutes, and it was like, all right, we're jog for a minute 30. And it wasn't a jog. It was a fast jog. It was almost a sprint, and then sprint all out 30 seconds. Then the minute 30 jog again, sprint all out 30 seconds for 20, 25, 30, 35 minutes at a time. And you can definitely tell, because that was early season, you can definitely tell once we got doing that, we got more specifics for our events, that things carried over a whole lot. Like you could tell you weren't as fatigued doing it the more you did it. And you could tell, like, at least for me, that I could tell that I had more, at least my anaerobic stuff also increased along with being able to run for a long period of time without having to, stop and catch my breath, because I don't like aerobic training at all. I hate it. But you can tell doing that definitely benefited a whole lot than just going out and doing long, slow distance. And that's where I think having that specific training per your athlete will come into play. So, like, I was a sprinter. Usually you're not going to have a sprinter go out and do long, slow distance. So our coach like, all right, we're still going to have you run for a long period of time, but we're going to do it in a manner that's going to be similar to what you do for your event, where you sprint. We're going to have sprints in there along with your recovery, which is that 1 minute 30. Recover between bouts of 30-second sprints. So yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Do you think too that? Go ahead. Sorry.
Doing a high intensity method like that, I think, is definitely beneficial to improving both without detrimentalizing one over the other. So
Right. Try not to impede on the other, like we talked about. But do you think too, there's also like a novelty aspect of it? I've always thought about this. So take, for example, somebody who's in a sport that's more of a repeatability, like you're taking like an offensive lineman who doesn't really move very far, maybe maximum like 20, 25 yards, and they have like 7-second, 10-second bouts or whatever. Taking them from a stimulus that they're so used to on their field and putting them in a novel stimulus like a longer slow distance, and vice versa. So somebody who's more of a repeat bout, they're used to that type of exercise, putting them in more of a longer type approach to give them that aerobic type of stimulus that they never really had before. And then vice versa, taking more of an aerobic style trained athlete and bringing them into more of an intermittent Tabata style bouts and giving that high intensity approach.
I think it'd be beneficial. But again, without trying to impede on what they're doing. So like,
right.
Definitely for linemen, you can tell that, all right, you might benefit a little bit from doing some type of aerobic training. That way you can at least, maintain prolonged fatigue during the game. So yeah, I definitely think it does have some carryover and would benefit without impeding on what they naturally do. But yeah.
Potentially too with that, it's like, and also it really depends on what you're going to be putting them upon. Like you're not going to have an offensive lineman go out and do a long, slow distance run. However, you may put them if you're in the gym, you're like, hey, go jump on the assault bike, or take do like a 30-minute light capacity, like 70% on the bike or something like that. Now that doesn't necessarily have, tremendous carryover to exactly what they're doing on the field, but may help, kind of like we were talking about with aerobic capacity, just simply helping with the recycling of nutrients, helping with blood supply and blood flow, and trying to maybe even increase that mitochondria count to help with energy supply.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. 100%.
For sure. Absolutely. We have another question. Was that it?
There was one more, but neither of us did.
Oh, that's right.
So.
That's right. All right. Do you have anything else you wanted to chat about while we're on here? Trying to think.
No, off the top of my head.
Okay.
We have a video thing next week too. I think another one next week as well.
Might be the week. I think we're split weeks. We do like one on,
Okay.
one off.
Okay.
So yeah, that'll be good there. I'm looking forward to these talks. I always like chatting. All right, that's cool then. I will send me that information and I'll do a little summary and we'll go from there. All right.
Cool. Definitely will.
All right, dude. I will be in touch with you. We'll talk soon.
Awesome. See you, man. Have a good one.
You too, bro. Take care.
Good.